All right, let's talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers here. This is a Steelers team that needs to make some changes this offseason, some big changes if they want to get back where they need to be. This last decade or so has been disappointing, disheartening, whatever phrase you want to use. It's not how the Pittsburgh Steelers should perform, especially when it comes to the postseason, making deep playoff runs. And we've got some news out of Pittsburgh about a big move that seems to be coming that could be one of these big changes. But first, I'm Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. The Steelers team obviously needs to make a ton of changes. We're looking at the coaching staff, we're looking at the roster, front office. Things need to head in a different direction, and it looks like the Steelers are heading in a different direction when it comes to embattled wide receiver George Pickens, especially when you read between the lines. We got two reports for you. Let's pull up the first one real quick. This is courtesy of CBS Sports. At the forefront of Steelers-related news is the team's possible plans and for involving embattled wideout George Pickens. Regarding Pickens, both the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and Sports Illustrated have alluded to Pickens' future with the Steelers. SI reported that the Steelers are ready to move on from Pickens while doing a complete overhaul of the receiving corps. While a productive player, Pickens' maturity issues have continued to hinder his potential. He was reportedly late to Pittsburgh's Week 17 loss to the Chiefs, for example. All right, so every time in the offseason, especially with a team that has a disappointing end and usually an embattled young player, there's always rumors about trade, right? Just who's going to get traded? Are they ready to move on from a player? This happens all the time. In fact, an example of this was with the Miami Dolphins with their wide receiver, their star wide receiver, Tyreek Hill. What's interesting, though, is that the Steelers have said virtually nothing about George Pickens. Most of the time when a trade demand happens, the team's ownership or GM or coach comes out and says, hey, listen, we don't want to trade him, right? They kind of quash it publicly. What's interesting, though, and this is our second report here, if you want to go pull it up, Mize, from TOI Sports, is that the Dolphins GM, Chris Greer, clarified that Tyreek Hill has not made a formal trade request. Grill underlined the team is committed to rebuilding their relationship with Hill. This was after Tyreek Hill seemed to basically publicly request a trade. So let's compare these two stories here. We've got the Steelers wide receiver reportedly going to get traded. We got the Dolphins wide receiver wanting to get traded. The Dolphins come out and say their GM leadership says, we ain't trading them. Pittsburgh Steelers, totally silent. Read between the lines here, folks. The Steelers, they're planning to move George Pickens. I think at this point, it seems more likely than not. In fact, I would put like a 90+% probability on it. Miles, I'm curious what your thoughts are on all of this. But first, Steelers fans, in the comment section below, what do you think of a potential George Pickens trade? Do you think it's good riddance? Get rid of him, get whatever you can in return for him. Do you think they should only trade him if they get a lot of value back? Or do you think they should hold on to him and give another chance? Let us know your thoughts on George Pickens in the comment section below. But Miles, I'll turn it over to you now. What are your thoughts on the Steelers and Pickens and just everything with this future of this team?
Yeah, Nick, I think like what you said, the silence is deafening for the Steelers on George Pickens because it's not like they haven't talked about anything. They haven't tight-lipped just the whole situation on any part of this because they have said certain things about certain players. They said who they don't want. They've leaked it out that, as far as quarterback situation, Aaron Rodgers, that's not the guy that they want to go forward with at quarterback. Who they do like at the quarterback position, between Russell Wilson, they didn't really say much about him, but they did say that Fields looked nice. They've wanted to bring him back in some capacity with the team, whether it's backup or not. Tomlin has even said at times that he sees that Fields, is a serviceable quarterback starter in this league. So they've said things on that, but not saying anything at all about George Pickens. Very telling for the Steelers. Pickens, supremely talented. We've seen him do some really nice things at times, just incredible stuff, but it is a litany of off-field issues, on-field issues. Not showing up to the game on time is actually inexcusable. I've never even really heard of that out of such a high-tier player. You just can't do stuff like that. Pickens, I think he is a locker room cancer for this team. He really drags it down. You see guys like this for a long time. Back in the day, I can remember for rivals for Steeler, Bernard Pollard is a guy in the locker room that was just really, he's a good player, good safety, did a lot of good things, but he was so bad that him and Harbaugh got into it a lot of times, and they ended up just moving on from him, and it was for the better for the team. So as good as Pickens is, I think the fact here that Tomlin and co are planning on moving off of him, you can see that if you read between the lines, see the silence said about Pickens versus what they've said about other situations facing the team. I think it may seem tough at first, but it is for the best because Pickens really just isn't that guy for the team. He's not the guy. He's not a vocal leader. He's a decent player, but let's be honest, Pittsburgh Steelers can really just throw names into hat and pull one out, and out comes a really good receiver. They're built like that. Their wide receiver selection skills are fantastic. So I think they'll be fine without him. And I think when you look at this report and you hear what they don't say, it's clear that they're going to move off of George Pickens.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. I also think George Pickens is a very valuable trade asset, even with all the locker room and even all with the maturity issues surrounding him. The folks over the cap.com, they do a great job breaking down a player's data, analytics, their age, position, productivity, all that, and they come up with the valuation. Okay, how much should this player cost against a salary cap based on all that? And over the cap value George Pickens at 12.9 million bucks. In 2025, he's currently allocated a cost 4.1 million bucks against the Pittsburgh Steelers salary cap. So what does that mean? It means if the Steelers trade George Pickens, they're whoever receives Pickens is getting a player at an $8 million discount, roughly. Obviously, some dollars won't be allocated to the new team after they trade him. Pittsburgh will be responsible for a small chunk of that, but that's kind of in the weeds. The point is, George Pickens is a valuable asset for someone to acquire, especially someone that feels they're on the verge of contending, but doesn't necessarily have the capital or have the need, or I'm sorry, have the ability to address a wide receiver position. And there's a lot of teams that are like this. I look at the Kansas City Chiefs as a great example. I don't know if the Pittsburgh Steelers will do a deal with the Chiefs, but the Chiefs, obviously, they got veteran receivers. They got guys like DeAndre Hopkins, concerned about Hollywood Brown. Could you see the Kansas City Chiefs flipping a second round pick or something like that for Pickens on a cheap deal? Chiefs obviously don't have a lot of cap space. I could see it. You look at a team like the Dallas Cowboys, right? They're looking for a number two opposite CeeDee Lamb. They don't have a lot of cap space because they're locked up with deals like with Prescott, Lamb, Micah Parsons extension coming soon. I could see the Dallas Cowboys potentially picking up a guy like George Pickens, flipping a second round pick for him, taking on the short term dollars deal. There's a lot of teams that fall into this mold that would be very interesting to getting Pickens at this price. I think the Pittsburgh Steelers are being very, very deliberate in the fact that they're so silent, saying, hey, we're doing back channels discussions here. We want to talk about and considering a trade from Pickens. I think it's the right move to make, right? At this point, this is a Steelers team that needs a total reset. And you brought up the fact that the Steelers have been very public about other things. They were like 5 seconds after getting killed by Baltimore, they immediately came out and said, Mike Tomlin's our guy, right? They have said nothing on Pickens despite all these trade rumors. They are definitely shopping him behind the scenes. I think they're going to get a bunch of offers. I think Pittsburgh can sit back and just take the best one. And I think this is the kind of move the Steelers need. They need to go back to acquiring capital, putting good guys in the locker room, good situation, good culture fit, kind of get back to those Bill Cowher early 2000s teams. I look at like the 2003 Steelers as an example of this, 2002, 2003 Steelers, where it was kind of ugly, but they're trying to resetting the culture, putting in the right guys, and then that led to that mid 2000s run. I think the Steelers need to take that approach right now. Could be a couple ugly seasons, but if they reset the culture, build this roster the right way, they can go back to winning championships again in a few years.